Story 1. The Whispering Voicemail. I had always been a skeptic, someone who dismissed the supernatural as mere fiction. My job as a software developer kept me grounded in the world of logic and reason. But all of that changed on an unremarkable Tuesday night. I was sitting in my cramped apartment, coding away with the hum of the city outside my window, when my phone buzzed on the desk beside me. It was a voicemail from my own number. Confused, I stared at the screen for a moment before curiosity got the better of me. I pressed play, expecting a glitch or some sort of technical error. What I heard sent a chill down my spine. The message was nothing but heavy breathing and whispers, so faint they were almost inaudible. But amidst the static and gasps, one thing was clear: someone was saying my name. Over and over again. Daniel. Daniel. My heart pounded in my chest as I replayed the message, hoping I'd misheard. The voice, raspy and distant, felt like it was coming from another world. I tried to rationalize it, perhaps a prank, a wrong number, or some kind of interference. But none of it made sense. Who could be behind this? And why was it coming from my own number? That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak and groan of my apartment seemed amplified, shadows stretched into grotesque shapes, and my mind raced with questions and fear. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next morning, groggy and anxious, I decided to show the message to my best friend, Sarah. She had always been a voice of reason in my life, someone who could put things into perspective. We met at our usual coffee shop, the smell of roasted beans offering a small comfort against the growing unease in my mind. "Hey, Sarah, you need to hear this," I said, sliding my phone across the table. She raised an eyebrow but obliged, listening intently to the voicemail. Her face paled as the whispers filled the air between us. "Daniel, this is seriously creepy. Have you called your phone company?" "No, not yet." "I thought I'd talk to you first," I admitted. "I can't explain this." We spent the next hour discussing possible explanations, but nothing seemed to fit. Sarah suggested I contact my service provider, and though it felt like a futile gesture, I agreed. Later that day, I called customer support and was transferred through a series of unhelpful representatives. Finally, I reached a technician who promised to look into the issue. Days passed without any new messages, and I began to think it might have been a one-time glitch. But the sense of dread lingered, like a dark cloud hovering just out of sight. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself, but my mind kept drifting back to that eerie voice. Then, one night, the phone buzzed again. Another voicemail from my own number. With trembling hands, I pressed play. The same heavy breathing, the same sinister whispers, but this time, there was something else, a sound in the background, almost like crying. And then, clearer than ever, my name, spoken with a chilling familiarity. "Daniel, we need you." A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I knew then that this was no ordinary prank. Something was reaching out to me, something beyond my understanding. And it wasn't going to stop. "Hey, subscribe for more scary stories." The second message left me shaken to my core. I couldn't deny it any longer. Something unearthly was trying to contact me. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. My rational mind was at war with the creeping dread that had taken root in my heart. I decided to seek out a professional, someone who dealt with the paranormal. After some research, I found Dr. Evelyn Marsh, a renowned parapsychologist known for her work on hauntings and spiritual disturbances. Evelyn's office was in an old Victorian house on the outskirts of the city, a fitting location for someone in her line of work. I arrived on a rainy afternoon, the sky overcast and brooding. The house itself seemed to exude an aura of mystery, with its creaking floors and dimly lit hallways. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," I said as I took a seat in her cluttered office. Shelves lined with ancient books and artifacts surrounded us, adding to the eerie ambience. "It's no problem, Daniel. I've encountered many unusual cases, but yours intrigued me. Please, tell me everything," she urged, her eyes sharp and attentive. I recounted the events, the voicemails, the whispers, the growing sense of being watched. Evelyn listened intently, nodding occasionally. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled. This is indeed troubling. The fact that the calls are coming from your own number suggests a strong personal connection. Have you experienced any other unusual phenomena? I hesitated, then nodded. I've been having strange dreams, too. They're always the same. I'm walking through a dark forest, and there's someone or something just out of sight, whispering my name. Evelyn's expression grew more serious. This might be more than a simple haunting. It could be an entity trying to communicate or even warn you. We need to find out what it wants and why it has latched onto you. She suggested we conduct a seance, a method she had used successfully in the past to make contact with spirits. Though I was skeptical and more than a little frightened, I agreed. We arranged to meet at my apartment later that evening. As the sun set, casting long shadows across my living room, Evelyn prepared the space. She lit candles and arranged them in a circle on the floor, their flickering flames casting an eerie glow. We sat in the center, and Evelyn began to chant softly, her voice steady and calm. Spirits of the other world, we seek your presence. Reveal yourself and speak your truth. For a moment, nothing happened. I felt a surge of relief, thinking maybe it was all just a mistake. But then, the temperature in the room dropped sharply, and the candles flickered violently. I could hear it again, the heavy breathing, the whispers, growing louder and more insistent. Daniel. Daniel. The voice was all around us, echoing off the walls. My heart pounded as Evelyn's eyes widened in alarm. This is a powerful entity, she said, her voice strained. We need to be careful. Suddenly, the whispers ceased, replaced by a low, mournful wail that seemed to come from the very depths of despair. And then, clear as day, a figure began to materialize in the center of the circle, a translucent, ghostly form of a woman, her face contorted in sorrow. Help me, she whispered, her voice a haunting melody. They won't let me rest. Evelyn and I exchanged a horrified glance. The ghostly figure reached out to me, her eyes pleading. Daniel, you must help me find peace. The room grew colder still, and a sense of dread washed over me. This was far from over. Whatever had reached out to me was desperate, and its plea for help was only the beginning of a deeper, darker mystery. After the seance, I couldn't shake the image of the ghostly woman from my mind. Her desperate plea haunted my thoughts, and I knew I had to uncover her story. Evelyn suggested that we research the history of my apartment and its previous occupants. Maybe we could find a connection to the restless spirit. The following day, we met at the city archives, a dusty, dimly lit place that seemed frozen in time. We sifted through old records, newspapers, and property deeds, searching for any clue that might explain the haunting. Hours passed, and just as frustration began to set in, we stumbled upon a newspaper article from the early 1900s. Tragic death at Elmwood Apartments, the headline read. My heart raced as I skimmed the article. It detailed the mysterious death of a young woman named Lillian Moore, who had lived in my apartment over a century ago. She had been found dead under strange circumstances, and her death was ruled a suicide, though rumors of foul play persisted. Lillian Moore, I whispered, the name sending a shiver down my spine. This has to be her. Evelyn nodded. It fits. But why is she reaching out to you? There must be something more. We dug deeper, uncovering more about Lillian's life. She had been engaged to a man named Thomas Reed, a wealthy businessman with a dark reputation. Their relationship had been tumultuous, and many believed Thomas had been abusive. Lillian's death had left many unanswered questions, and it seemed her spirit was still seeking justice or closure. Armed with this information, we returned to my apartment. Evelyn suggested another seance, this time with a focus on communicating directly with Lillian. As night fell, we prepared the room once more, the familiar dread settling over me. Lillian, we know who you are, Evelyn called out. We want to help you. Please, tell us what you need. The air grew heavy, and the temperature dropped. The candles flickered, and once again, the ghostly figure of Lillian appeared before us. Her face was a mask of sorrow, but there was also a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He took everything from me. My life, my happiness. I cannot rest until he is brought to justice." "But Thomas is long dead," I said, my voice trembling. "How can we help you now?" Lillian's form flickered, her expression growing more desperate. "His spirit, it is bound to this place. You must find his remains and destroy them. Only then can I be free." Evelyn and I exchanged a worried glance. Destroying remains sounded like a task straight out of a horror movie, but I knew we had to try. We began searching the apartment, looking for any hidden spaces or clues that might lead us to Thomas's remains. Hours later, in a small crawlspace beneath the floorboards, we found it, a decayed, rotting wooden box. Inside were human bones, wrapped in a tattered piece of cloth. The air around us grew icy, and a sense of malevolence filled the room. "We need to burn these," Evelyn said, her voice firm. "It's the only way." We gathered the bones and took them to the abandoned lot behind the apartment building. As we set them ablaze, a piercing wail filled the air, and for a moment, I thought I saw a dark, shadowy figure in the smoke, thrashing and writhing before finally dissipating into nothingness. When the flames died down, a profound sense of relief washed over me. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Evelyn and I returned to the apartment, exhausted but hopeful. That night, I received one final voicemail. It was Lillian, her voice clear and serene. "Thank you, Daniel. I am free now." But as I smiled, a chill ran down my spine. In the background of the message, I heard it again, the heavy breathing, the whispers, and a new voice, deep and menacing. "You've only just begun, Daniel." The sinister message from the unknown voice sent chills down my spine. I thought freeing Lillian would end the nightmare, but it seemed I had only scratched the surface of something much darker. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap, its walls closing in with each passing second. Evelyn and I sat in my living room, the remnants of our recent ordeal still fresh in our minds. "We need to find out who or what this new presence is," Evelyn said, her face pale but determined. "It's clearly more powerful and malevolent than Lillian." We decided to dig deeper into the building's history, hoping to uncover any other tragedies or dark events that might explain the new entity. After hours of combing through more records and talking to longtime residents, we uncovered a chilling pattern. Over the past century, several tenants had reported similar experiences, strange phone calls, whispers, and sightings of shadowy figures. Many had moved out abruptly, some leaving without a trace. Evelyn theorized that the building itself was a conduit for supernatural activity, a place where restless spirits were drawn and trapped. She suggested performing a cleansing ritual, one that would involve more than just burning remains. It required confronting the entity directly and banishing it for good. As we prepared for the ritual, a sense of dread settled over me. This time, the danger felt more real, more immediate. We gathered the necessary items, salt, sage, candles, and a book of ancient incantations Evelyn had brought along. We waited until midnight, the witching hour, to begin. The ritual started with Evelyn drawing a protective circle on the floor, sprinkling salt around its edges. We sat inside, candles lit, and she began to chant, her voice strong and clear. The air grew thick, and the temperature plummeted. Shadows danced on the walls, and a low, guttural growl echoed through the room. "Show yourself," Evelyn commanded, her voice unwavering. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the shadows coalesced into a dark figure, its form shifting and writhing. Red eyes glowed from the darkness, filled with malice and hatred. The entity radiated an aura of pure evil, and I felt a primal fear grip my heart. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice trembling. The entity laughed, a sound that sent ice through my veins. "I am what remains of the darkness that consumes. I am bound to this place, feeding on the fear and despair of those who dwell here." Evelyn continued her incantations, her voice rising above the entity's taunts. The candles flickered violently, and the air crackled with energy. The entity snarled, its form becoming more unstable. "You will not banish me so easily," it hissed, lunging toward us. But the protective circle held, and it recoiled, screaming in fury. Drawing strength from Evelyn's courage, I joined in the chant, our voices merging into a powerful force. The entity writhed, its shape distorting, and a deafening roar filled the room. The air shimmered, and for a brief moment, I saw glimpses of the past, faces twisted in fear, moments of violence and sorrow that had fed the entity's power. With one final, desperate cry, the entity exploded into a burst of dark energy, dissipating into nothingness. The room fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting. We had done it. The building felt different, lighter, as if a curse had been lifted. Exhausted but relieved, Evelyn and I sat in the aftermath of our battle. The sense of victory was bittersweet, knowing that such darkness had existed for so long. "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse. "I couldn't have done this without you." Evelyn smiled weakly. "You were brave, Daniel. But remember, the supernatural world is always closer than we think. Stay vigilant." As she left, I felt a sense of closure but also a lingering unease. That night, as I settled into bed, my phone buzzed once more. I hesitated, fear gripping me, before finally checking the screen. It was a voicemail from an unknown number. I pressed play, my heart pounding. This time, there was no breathing, no whispers, just silence. And then, a single word, clear and unmistakable. "Run." The phone slipped from my hands, and the darkness of my apartment seemed to close in around me. The true haunting had only just begun. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The Last Reflection. The day started like any other, or so I thought. I awoke to the sound of birds chirping outside my window and the faint rustle of leaves in the early morning breeze. The house was unusually quiet, almost oppressively so. My wife, Sarah, and our young daughter, Lily, were visiting Sarah's parents for the weekend, leaving me alone in our sprawling Victorian home. I relished the solitude at first, but that morning felt different, a bit off. Groggy and still half asleep, I stumbled out of bed and headed towards the bathroom. As I entered, I froze. Every single mirror in the house was shattered. Fragments of glass littered the floor, reflecting the dim morning light in chaotic patterns. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of the scene before me. How could this have happened? I hadn't heard a thing during the night. I navigated carefully through the shards, making my way to the kitchen. My phone was there, and I needed to call Sarah to tell her what had happened. As I reached for the phone, I noticed something strange. One mirror remained intact. It was an old, ornate mirror that hung in the hallway just outside the kitchen. Its frame was gilded and intricately carved, a family heirloom passed down through generations. It had always been a bit out of place among our more modern decor, but now it seemed to radiate an ominous presence. I approached the mirror cautiously, a chill running down my spine. As I got closer, I saw it, my reflection, standing behind me, grinning wickedly. I spun around, heart racing, but there was no one there. The reflection was gone. Trembling, I turned back to the mirror. My own reflection stared back at me, innocent and normal, as if nothing had happened. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cool glass, and for a moment, everything felt surreal, like a waking nightmare. "Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty house. Silence answered me. I felt a creeping dread, an inexplicable sense that something was terribly wrong. I backed away from the mirror, unable to tear my eyes away from its surface. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own, drawing me in with its malevolent energy. My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, loud thud from upstairs. I jumped, my heart nearly leaping out of my chest. I hesitated for a moment, fear rooting me in place. But curiosity and a sense of duty to protect my home pushed me forward. I grabbed a flashlight from a kitchen drawer and slowly made my way up the creaking stairs. The house seemed to close in around me, each step echoing like a death knell in the oppressive silence. As I reached the top of the stairs, I saw that the door to the attic was ajar. I hadn't been up there in months, not since we moved in and stored away some old furniture in boxes. The thud had come from up there, I was sure of it. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open wider, the hinges creaking in protest. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the dusty, cluttered space. Something moved in the corner of the attic, a shadow shifting among the boxes. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The shadow grew larger, taking on a vaguely human shape. My hand tightened around the flashlight, its weight suddenly comforting. The shadow stepped forward, and my blood ran cold. The shadow advanced slowly, each step measured and deliberate. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stand my ground. The flashlight's beam flickered, casting eerie, dancing shadows around the attic. As the figure came into view, I realized it was an old mannequin draped in a moth-eaten sheet. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. Something was still very wrong. I stepped closer, lifting the sheet to inspect the mannequin. It was a relic from the previous owners, a detail we had dismissed as an oddity. But now, it felt like a harbinger of something sinister. The mannequin's face was blank, yet I felt an inexplicable unease as if it were watching me. I shivered, dropping the sheet back in place. Turning to leave, I heard a faint whisper. It was almost imperceptible, like the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze, but distinctly human. I strained to listen, my heart pounding in my ears. The whisper grew louder, forming words that sent chills down my spine. "Help me." I spun around, shining the flashlight in all directions. The attic was empty, save for the forgotten furniture and boxes. Panic began to set in. I fumbled for my phone, desperate to call Sarah. My hands trembled as I dialed her number. The call went straight to voicemail. Frustrated, I left a hurried message explaining what had happened and urging her to call me back immediately. As I ended the call, the whispering resumed, this time coming from the old mirror I had brought up to the attic months ago. Its surface was clouded with dust, but I could see my reflection faintly. The same wicked grin I had seen earlier now stretched across my mirrored face. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. Desperation took hold. I grabbed an old blanket and threw it over the mirror, hoping to smother whatever malevolent force it held. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake. I stood there, panting, trying to gather my thoughts. What was happening to me? Had I lost my mind? I decided to leave the attic and head back downstairs. As I descended, I noticed something strange. The house felt colder, darker, as if the shadows had grown deeper. My footsteps echoed loudly, each creak of the floorboards amplifying my fear. When I reached the living room, I saw that the family photos on the walls had been turned face down. A sense of dread filled me. I righted one of the photos, my hands shaking. It was a picture of Sarah, Lily, and me, taken last Christmas. But something was wrong. In the reflection of the glass, I saw another figure standing behind us, its face obscured but unmistakably there. I dropped the photo, the glass shattering on impact. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen. I rushed in to find all the cabinet doors open, contents strewn across the floor. The room was a mess of broken dishes and spilled food. And there, on the kitchen table, was a message scrawled in what looked like blood, "Leave now." I staggered back, fear clawing at my sanity. My first instinct was to run, but I couldn't leave without understanding what was happening. I needed answers. I needed to protect my family. Gathering my courage, I decided to confront whatever was haunting me. I returned to the hallway mirror, the only one that had remained intact. The reflection was normal at first, but as I stared, it changed. My own face twisted into that same malevolent grin. And then, in a voice that was both mine and not mine, it spoke, "You cannot escape." The voice echoed through the house, chilling me to my core. I staggered back, unable to tear my eyes away from the mirror. My reflection sneered, its eyes glittering with malice. I felt a sickening wave of terror wash over me. Was this some kind of twisted nightmare? Desperation clawed at my mind, and I realized I needed help. I grabbed my coat and keys, intending to flee the house, but as I reached the front door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang. The force knocked me off my feet. I scrambled to my knees, frantically trying to open the door, but it was as if an invisible force held it shut. I was trapped. A sense of helplessness overwhelmed me. I sank to the floor, my back against the door, trying to steady my breathing. I needed to think. I needed to understand what was happening. The whispers returned, now louder and more insistent, filling the air with a cacophony of voices. They seemed to come from all directions, enveloping me in a suffocating embrace. In a moment of clarity, I remembered the old journal I had found in the attic when we first moved in. It belonged to the previous owner, a man named Thomas Aldrich. I had dismissed it at the time, thinking it was just a relic of the past. But now, it seemed like my only hope. I hurried back up to the attic, praying it held some answers. The journal was buried beneath a pile of dusty books. I flipped through its pages, my hands shaking. Thomas Aldrich had written extensively about the house and his experiences. His words painted a picture of a man driven to the brink of madness by the same entity that now tormented me. He spoke of a mirror, a portal to a malevolent spirit that sought to possess and destroy. One entry caught my eye. Thomas had discovered a ritual to banish the spirit, but he had been too late to complete it. He detailed the steps: a circle of salt, a lit candle, and the recitation of a specific incantation. It seemed simple enough, but fear gnawed at me. Could I trust the ramblings of a man who had ultimately succumbed to the darkness? With no other options, I decided to try. I gathered the necessary items and set up the ritual in the living room. The whispers grew louder as I worked, mocking me, trying to break my resolve. I drew the circle of salt, placed the candle in the center, and lit it with trembling hands. The flame flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. I took a deep breath and began to recite the incantation. The words felt foreign on my tongue, their power palpable. The air grew thick with tension, the temperature dropping rapidly. The whispers turned into anguished screams, the house shaking violently. I pressed on, repeating the incantation with increasing urgency. Suddenly, a force slammed into me, knocking me out of the circle. The candle extinguished, plunging the room into darkness. I lay there, gasping for breath, feeling the malevolent presence closing in. In the faint light from the hallway, I saw my reflection in the mirror, grinning triumphantly. It stepped out of the mirror, a dark, twisted version of myself. "You cannot win," it hissed, its voice a distorted echo of my own. "You belong to me." I struggled to my feet, backing away from the advancing figure. The air crackled with dark energy, the walls pulsating with life. I felt the cold grip of fear tightening around my heart. This was no longer just about saving myself. It was about saving my family, my home, my very soul. In a final act of defiance, I lunged for the candle, relighting it with a trembling hand. I stepped back into the circle, the salt crunching beneath my feet. The figure halted, its grin faltering. I began the incantation again, louder and more determined. The house shook, the screams reaching a fever pitch. The dark reflection snarled, lunging at the circle, but it was too late. The ritual's power surged, enveloping the room in a blinding light. The figure screamed, its form disintegrating into shadows. I felt a surge of relief as the light intensified, consuming everything in its path. And then, silence. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed the house moments before. I stood in the center of the salt circle, the candle's flame flickering gently. My heart pounded in my chest, and I dared not move, fearing that any disturbance might break the fragile peace. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifted, but a lingering unease kept me on edge. Was it really over? I stepped cautiously out of the circle, scanning the room. The mirror stood untouched, its surface reflecting the flickering candlelight. I approached it slowly, my reflection staring back at me, normal and unsmiling. I felt a tentative sense of victory, but it was tempered by the knowledge that these things rarely ended so cleanly. There had to be more. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from Sarah, on our way back home. "Miss you." Relief and dread washed over me simultaneously. I needed to ensure the house was safe before they returned. I decided to inspect the rest of the house, starting with the basement, a place we seldom visited. The basement door creaked open, revealing a steep set of stairs descending into darkness. I grabbed a flashlight, the beam slicing through the gloom. The basement smelled musty, the air thick with neglect. Cobwebs clung to the ceiling, and the floor was covered in a thin layer of dust. As I reached the bottom, I noticed something strange, a faint, pulsating light emanating from the far corner. I approached the light cautiously, my flashlight revealing an old, dusty chest. The light seeped from the cracks around its lid, casting eerie shadows on the walls. My pulse quickened. I had never seen this chest before. With a deep breath, I lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in tattered cloth, was a smaller, intricately carved mirror. Its surface shimmered with an unnatural glow. As I gazed into the mirror, my reflection began to warp and twist. The wicked grin returned, more sinister than ever. My reflection's eyes glowed with malevolence, and I felt a cold, dark presence seeping into the room. The mirror was the source of the evil, a portal to the malevolent entity that had plagued me. I knew what I had to do. I grabbed the mirror, the cold surface sending a shock through my system. I carried it upstairs, back to the salt circle. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, the house shaking with their fury. I placed the mirror in the center of the circle, relighting the candle. The air grew thick with tension, the temperature plummeting. I began the incantation once more, my voice trembling but resolute. The whispers turned to screams, the house shaking violently. The mirror's surface rippled, the dark reflection thrashing against the confines of the glass. I pressed on, the words flowing with a newfound strength. Suddenly, the mirror shattered, the pieces flying outward in a blinding explosion of light. The force knocked me backward, and I hit the ground hard, the air driven from my lungs. The light consumed the room, burning away the darkness. I lay there, gasping, as the house slowly settled into silence. When I finally opened my eyes, the room was calm. The candle had burned down to a stub, and the salt circle was undisturbed. The mirror was gone, its pieces reduced to dust. I stood up shakily, the weight of the ordeal lifting. It was over. I had won. As I stood there, catching my breath, I heard the front door open. Sarah and Lily's voices filled the house, their laughter a sweet relief. I rushed to greet them, pulling them into a tight embrace. They sensed something had happened, but I reassured them with a weary smile. The house was safe. We were safe. That night, as we settled in for bed, I felt a lingering unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching, waiting. As I drifted off to sleep, my thoughts returned to the attic, to the chest where I had found the mirror. Had I truly destroyed it? Or had I merely delayed the inevitable? In the darkness of the night, I dreamed of mirrors and shadows, of whispers and screams. And when I woke, the house was silent, the morning light filtering through the windows. I rose and went to the bathroom, my reflection greeting me as it always had. But as I turned away, I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of the mirror, a shadow, a smile. The end was not a promise of peace, but a warning. For in the corners of our minds, in the depths of our homes, darkness always lingers, waiting for the light to falter. The end. Subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.